Wittenoom. Located around 1,100 kilometres northeast of Perth, the small Australian town now lies all but empty, with only a handful of residents remaining. During the 1950s, Wittenoom was known as the Pilbara region's largest town, a monument of prosperity. But today, it is a ghost town. The town was originally constructed to support the local mine. From 1950 until the early 1960s, Wittenoom was Australia's only supplier of asbestos, with around 161,000 tonnes being mined. During that time, approximately 20,000 people lived and worked in the town. Asbestos mining at Wittenoom was the greatest occupational health and safety tragedy in Australia. Comparable to the Chernobyl and Bhopal catastrophes, Wittenoom was shut down in 1966 with a dreadful legacy of asbestosis and mesothelioma for the 20,000 men, women and children who lived and worked there. Sadly, a great many more people will continue to die or become disabled by asbestos-related diseases across Australia before the epidemic finally peaks. By 2020, the total deaths Australia-wide due to asbestosis is estimated to climb as high as 45,000, with several thousand of these being attributed to exposure in Wittenoom alone. The man most credited with exposing the health risks from asbestos mining at Wittenoom is Dr. Jim McNulty. We visited Jim in his home in Perth to try to better understand the events of the Wittenoom tragedy.
I was working in England in TB, was a chest physician in Stoke-on-Trent. And Stoke-on-Trent had a lot of dust disease, both from the coal mining industry and from the pottery industry. So I had a fair bit of experience in people coming in with dust disease, silicosis or coal miner pneumoconiosis or whatever, as well as TB. And then I had a ring from a doctor whom I'd worked for in South Wales. And he said that he'd been asked to find somebody to go to Kalgoorlie who was experienced in dust diseases and TB. So in Kalgoorlie, I was a chest physician, and I became medical superintendent of the Kalgoorlie Hospital. When I was there, I had a mobile unit, X-ray unit, that returned from a normal tour to Wittenoom and brought back the X-rays from the asbestos miners there, and that showed a very considerable degree of lung disease due to asbestos. And it was so bad, in fact, that there were X-ray changes due to asbestos in lungs of miners who had only worked there for 2 years, which would be quite incredible by any occupational health standard. Anyhow, I went out to Wittenoom myself and was horrified by the conditions that I found. The whole town was laid with asbestos tailings as road surfacing. When you stepped off the plane, there's a flurry of dust which contained asbestos fibres. They drove up in a car to the pub to stay the night, and as the car stopped, the dust was spread up, became airborne, and you could feel the dust in your teeth almost. So every vehicle movement, as it was later in the town, stirred up asbestos, which contained asbestos fibres. In Wittenoom, you didn't have to work in the mine to develop dust disease because of the extensive use of the tailings around the town site, so that not till the mine managers and the managerial staff were often affected, as particularly sadly some of their children. Entrance to the mine was halfway up a cliff hill face, and the dust was very bad all throughout the mine. And what was a very bad feature, a particularly bad feature, was the dust extraction scheme.
The dust extraction system removed some of the dust and discharged it above roof level, but it flowed back to the mill and staff offices. The dust was also discharged at the same level as the main entrance to the underground mine, so the air entering the mine already contained dust. Even when the expensive extractor was working properly, it merely took the dust out of the mill and dumped it on the lawns, making it more dangerous outside than inside the mill.
That actually is what's called the Old Colonial Mill. It was an old mill that they had, which was only used sometimes when they got more pressure, and that was just horrendous dust everywhere. And the first crushings took place there, and the ore was gradually crushed more and more as it came down towards the bottom of the mine, where it came out as fibre, and there's a bagging plant down at the bottom where it was put into bags, a bit of a chute into bags. The bags were Hessian bags, so if you could imagine lifting a Hessian bag which is full of fine dust, put it over your shoulder, I mean, the dust is outside the bags. It's there. And you can find the same thing going down to the wharf at Fremantle when they're loading up the ships, dropped from the top of the holds down to the level, you see the dust rising everywhere. The new mill was an improvement because of more water on it, but water was scarce, and also there was a tendency not to wet the ore too much. Wet ore was unacceptable to the international people who wanted the ore, so therefore it tended to be just a sprinkle. So it was still pretty dry when it came out of the mill. Only later I came to understand that there were hurdles in regard to prevention. Not all. First of all, was that the water supply was poor, so they couldn't sort of drench it the way which you might like as one meals. That money was short. That it wasn't a very successful operation. That the mines inspector who were willing and wanted to do something were largely ineffective, and that the dust sampling techniques they were using were ineffective. And as you would know yourself, that if you're going to resolve a problem, you've got to identify what the causes are and why it's a problem, and then tackle that. And dust control is the primary thing.
The mine consisted of a number of stopes and a milling operation. Working conditions inside the mine were poor. Dust particles were visible in the air, and in some cases were so thick they reduced visibility. The underground was humid and poorly ventilated. The miners worked in a cramped, stooped position as the stopes were low, some as low as about a metre, and the miners' constant use of handheld tools in these conditions often caused Raynaud's syndrome, resulting in pain and numbness of the hands. Employees worked continuously amongst the asbestos dust in the poorly ventilated mine and mill, sometimes wearing respirators which were ineffective and believed by Jim and the other visitors to be largely for show.
You couldn't sneak into Wittenoom in the sense that, or you could by road, I suppose, but Mickey Mouse Airlines, the airline that flew us up, they were largely sponsored by Colonial Sugar Refinery and the Blue Asbestos, and they knew everybody who was coming to the mine, and they knew when I was going to the mine. And I'd like to say that they dressed the whole place up and cleaned it up when I was going there, but they certainly tried to make it not as bad as it was.
Between 1957 and 1962, Jim repeatedly warned the company's manager of the dangers to the miners and the people living in the town. Mine management took no significant action.
The top brass from Colonial Sugar Refinery, who ran the mine, came to see me. And I can still remember, I'll use plainer language, but they said, all this fuss about dust is bull dust, isn't it? And I tried to tell them that about the amount of disease that I'd already found in the miners after such relatively short exposures, which were a scandal by any standard. Attempts to get changes made to dust measurement, and particularly, were blocked by people who had done the same thing for many years. They couldn't appreciate that you couldn't measure asbestos with a sampler because the asbestos clogged up the orifice, the fibres clogged the orifice up, and therefore you couldn't get a proper sample. The actual one we used to use came in that did show the fibres properly. And we used that, and the first dust sampling that took place then at the mine by the mines inspector and by myself were hideous. They had a crude level of 300 particles per cubic centimetre or something, and the dust levels just came back to 1,000 plus. And that was everything, silica, fibre, whatever. With the additional trouble that the fibre tend to block the orifice, and therefore you weren't getting a true sample anyway. So all you could really say about it is just too dusty.
the 1959 annual report of the Public Health Department expressed particular concern about the numbers of Wittenoom men affected by asbestosis and their relatively young age and the extremely short dust exposures. Unfortunately, the Public Health Department did not have the power to order the company to close down the mine. That was the responsibility of the Mines Department. It's difficult to understand why the mine and mill were allowed to operate without adequate risk control measures, and why nothing was done to force the company to clean them up, adopt safer work practices, or close down their operations.
It was a tragedy and should not have been allowed to develop as it did. But I recognise the needs for development in Western Australia at the time. I recognise too the lack of awareness of the scale of the problems, which was partly due to deliberate blindness, closing a mine to it, and partly due to the isolation and how far away it was. I mean, it might have well been in Timbuktu, if you like, as written from far as people in Perth were concerned. The lack of feedback from it, because most of the workforce were migrants off ships with very little English, and who were sent up there and who wept unseen, if you like, unheard. And the whole climate in Western Australia at the time was pro-development and against anything which inhibited that. So I suppose sums it up really. The governments didn't want to be aware of problems, so they were inclined to close their eyes and close their ears to problems.
"1988 saw the first victories in court for Wittenoom mesothelioma victims. The judge ruled that CSR acted with continuous, conscious and contumelious disregard for its workers' safety. CSR acknowledged liability for asbestos-related disease at Wittenoom. On June 30th, 2006, the government shut down the power grid to Wittenoom and the majority of the residents have relocated. The town now stands as a stark reminder of the dangers of choosing progress over safety and of the many unheeded warnings. If we have learned anything from Wittenoom, only time will tell."
Good evening. I swear I do. That was Tony Mockbell's promise when asked if he understood the strict rules of his bombshell release after 18 years behind bars. This was the moment the underworld kingpin walked free as he inches closer to having major drug convictions wiped clean. Tonight, he's living with his sister in suburban Viewbank, where locals are on edge.
Bailed and beaming, Melbourne's most notorious gangland figure,
Tony, how does freedom feel?
set free after 18 years behind bars.
Are the people of Viewbank safe?
Tony Mockbell looked every bit the gangster in a pinstripe suit before he was escorted into a $200,000 Mercedes and off on the road to freedom. Before he was escorted into a $200,000 Mercedes and off on the road to freedom. This was Mockbell's OJ moment. Tracked from the court precinct on roads not even built when he was last out in Melbourne's community.
Miss Sard, is there anything you can tell us? Are you feeling relieved that your brother's been released on bail?
After 50 minutes travelling through the city's northeast, the 59-year-old arrived at his sister's Viewbank home.
These are the shots of that Mercedes pulling in to the house, his sister's house, in Viewbank just in the past few minutes.
Today, the latest chapter in an underworld tale that's gripped the nation.
Good evening. Australia's most notorious drug baron, Tony Mockbell, has been sentenced.
In 2006, Mockbell skipped bail while on trial for cocaine importation. The fugitive captured 15 months later in Athens, sporting this now infamous wig.
How you feeling, Tony? Yeah, okay. Yeah. You looking to stay here for a bit? No. Yes.
After After being extradited back to Australia in 2008, he was accused, then acquitted, of ordering the 2004 execution of underworld patriarch Louis Moran. He was also charged over the 2003 murder of kickboxer and hot dog vendor Michael Marshall. That charge later dropped by prosecutors. Represented by lawyer-turned-police informer Nicola Gobbo, Mockbell pleaded guilty to drug trafficking in 2011 and in 2012 was sentenced to 30 years jail.
Drug trafficking was your business. It was your area of expertise. It was your career.
Behind bars in 2019, he was ambushed by 2 inmates and left with life-threatening injuries.
Tony Mockbell is now leaving the Court of Appeal, but it won't be long before he's back again. His lawyer ex-appeal will be heard before the end of the year.
It feels like a throwback almost 20 years today, so it's a significant development.
A lot has changed in 18 years. Weeks after he was jailed, the iPhone was released. Now, it's at version 16. The following year, it was the start of Spotify, Google Chrome, then Bitcoin. The iPad was launched, then Instagram. Mockbell was incarcerated during the pandemic as the rest of the city was locked down. When he went into jail, John Howard was Prime Minister. 6,514 days after his last taste of freedom, Mockbell is finally back, enjoying life on the outside.
Australia is called the lucky country, but the nation is built on more than just luck. It's built on heroes and heart, explorers, builders, and the brave. Australia has been forged in war and peace, discovery and invention, adversity and triumph. This is the story of Australia.
On the banks of the mighty Murray River, this is Yorta Yorta country, the land of my ancestors. When the British arrived, my people were murdered here by settlers and even by police. These atrocities spread all over Australia, and the violence and the seizure of land was how our country was formed. But we've only really heard one side of the story. For 65,000 years, hundreds of Indigenous tribes thrived here, living through an ice age and alongside megafauna. This is one of the oldest continuous cultures in the world. When these lands were colonised, a violent invasion began. Tens of thousands of Aboriginal men, women and children were killed. They were shot, raped and poisoned across the frontier. Many more died of disease. Aboriginal people call it the killing times.
So long, these things actually happened.
For generations, Aboriginal people have called for non-Indigenous people to come to terms with the way Australia was settled.
I think it's too horrific for people to take on board that their ancestors, non-Aboriginal ancestors, were a part of this.
Across the globe, truth and justice commissions have uncovered atrocities in divided nations.
We all stand in need of healing.
Now, for the first time, it's Australia's turn.
Some of the things
Of the massacres, I'm ashamed to say.
It's absolutely wrong. We all had to take responsibility for it.
Some people were shocked that they didn't know about it. Why didn't we know about it? Why didn't we learn it at school?
This is the stuff that continues to cause harm today. This 4-year Victorian Royal Commission is undertaking the most extensive investigation ever held into our dark past, even examining the legacy of a former Prime Minister. The unique thing about it is it's led by Aboriginal people. It's called Yuruk.
Yuruk means telling the truth, truth-telling. It's the Wamba Wamba word. And we need to tell our story because they don't really know the true story of what happened to us.
For Aboriginal elders like Yorta Yorta leader Paul Briggs, the violence of the past is ever present.
They're frightened, they don't know what to do.
In recent years, Uncle Paul says an elderly non-Indigenous man approached him to divulge a long-held family secret.
He said his grandfather would sit him down on his knee and talk to him about the hunting that happened. You know, they'd go out on the weekends hunting. And he said, Paul, you know, they were out hunting your people. He grew up in the same region I grew up, but he needed to talk about it. He felt the need to talk about it and tell somebody. We're the First Nations peoples. We've lived on our...
Uncle Paul told this chilling story to the Uruk Truth-Telling Commission.
The respect and value of First Nations peoples. I think the truth-telling lies with non-Aboriginal people. It's quite well documented what happened and what's happening to First Nations peoples right around the country. But it's not clear what non-Aboriginal people feel and do about it, about their part of it, their ownership of it.
For Uncle Paul, reconciliation remains elusive because of what he says is a denial of history.
I think it's rooted in this lack of understanding, this lack of respect and value, and this sense of belief that it was a peaceful colonial acquisition of country that was allowed to happen, and Aboriginal people sort of peacefully let them have it.
Welcome to Convict Sydney, New South Wales in the 1790s. A tiny settlement clinging to the edge of the great Aboriginal continent we call Australia. Now, most of us think of this as a pretty cruel and hopeless place, a dumping ground for the prisoners from Britain's overcrowded jails, where people were miserable most of the time. But that's not the whole story. New South Wales became a radical experiment in giving rogues, thieves and adventurers a chance. In 1790, the second fleet of English ships ever to go to the colony is on its way. On board are Lieutenant John MacArthur, his wife Elizabeth, and their baby son. They're on their way to begin a new life. These are two very ambitious people.
In my last letter, I informed you, my dear mother, of my husband's exchange to a corps destined for the convict settlement at New South Wales, from which we have every reasonable expectation of reaping the most material advantage.
MacArthur and Elizabeth have had to fight to get this far in life. They demand more space and privacy, as befits their status. But then the second fleet is the voyage from hell. It is run by private contractors who normally work the slave trade. They're paid whether the convicts on board, who are the main reason for the colony existing at all, arrive dead or alive. A quarter die on the voyage. It does nothing to sway the MacArthurs. They are seeking their fortune at the farthest corner of the empire, and God pity any man who gets in MacArthur's way. The Sydney town that awaits them has also been doing it tough. A tiny population of 1,000 people, nearly starved, waiting for the second fleet. The MacArthurs arrived to a raw, young community just over 2 years old, made up mostly of convicts. If the colony is ever to be more than a jail dependent on supplies from Britain, it needs free settlers like the MacArthurs to make it self-sufficient. In the meantime, Lieutenant MacArthur has come to join these men, the soldiers of the New South Wales Corps, the troops sent to protect the colony. And he couldn't have timed it better. The Corps will soon be left in charge when the colony's founding governor is recalled to England. In the years that follow, MacArthur and his fellow officers seize the opportunity left by the official vacuum to make their fortunes. As a member of the Corps, MacArthur is entitled to 100 acres of farmland, with convicts free of charge to work it. Before he's finished, he and Elizabeth will have a great deal more. Their farm and those of the other Corps members now deliver the produce needed to make the colony self-sufficient, a huge step forward in giving the colony a future. Gradually, the other smaller settlers, many of them ex-convicts, catch up as well. New South Wales is becoming more of a farming community than a jail for old lags. But all the farming land has to come from where? The short answer is from the Aborigines. As the white settlers take up more land across the 1790s, the Aborigines fight back. No one's asked them. The land is simply taken. By contrast, MacArthur has good relations with the local Durag people. Through careful negotiations, he avoids the violence and the troubles affecting other farmers. But MacArthur is anything but diplomatic with this man. In 1800, Governor Philip Gidley King arrives to find a colony spiralling out of control. Despite the progress made with farming, the colony is awash with hard liquor. Over the last 10 years, the Corps have made a fortune importing rum. They purchase an incredible 7,500 gallons of the stuff and sell it on at great profit. The Rum Corps, as they will become known, even use spirits as a form of currency. Scenes of drunken and licentious behaviour become the norm. King is appalled and determined to assert control. He outlaws the officers trading rum and encourages other forms of power. King's fight with the Rum Corps brings him into direct confrontation with John MacArthur. King shows his colours when he calls the Rum Corps hucksters and sides with the small settlers who owe them money. Well, MacArthur is livid. He and his fellow officers will not be told off by some jumped-up governor, especially one from the Navy. And he announces that the officers will boycott Government House. And that leads to this. MacArthur challenging his own commanding officer, Colonel Patterson, to a duel. Patterson's crime? Telling MacArthur to show the governor some respect.
You will rot in Norfolk Island for this. Damn you, sir. I'm no sir. You've treated me with the blackest treachery. I demand a court-martial in London, point of honour. Oh, for heaven's sake. Excellent. You're bound for London forthwith.
MacArthur is sent to England, but the court-martial collapses after all the paperwork is rather conveniently lost at sea. And he deftly brings the matter to a close by resigning from the army. But London is a big, fat opportunity for MacArthur, and he makes the most of it. Far from slinking around the streets in disgrace, he lobbies the government to support a scheme to make the Australian colony a major wool producer. He wants land, and plenty of it.
MacArthur. Banks. Sir Joseph Banks.
Yeah. But it almost comes unstuck when he meets one of White Australia's founding fathers. Their talk will be the first small step to the Rum Rebellion.
I was surprised to see you didn't bid for the Cheviot Ram.
No, I like a sheep with wool on its face. Got a hard sun in Australia, as you well know.
Indeed I do. I assume your intention is to take your purchases back to Australia immediately. If that is the case, you may well be unaware there is an Act of Parliament that forbids the exportation of English live sheep from these shores.
Never heard of such a thing.
But I'd be prepared to help you around this travail.
And why would you want to do that?
I'm interested to see the colony prosper.
Well, there's only one thing I'm interested in seeing prosper, and I can do it without your help.
Perhaps you're right. The Cheviot isn't suitable for New South Wales. I do hope, however, that the people of the colony share one of its qualities.
Oh, yes.
There's no fear of the wool being pulled over its eyes. I bid you good day, sir.
He can't help himself, can he, MacArthur? Next stop, the corridors of power, and no less a personage than the Secretary of State for the colonies.
Your encounter with Sir Joseph is the talk of Whitehall.
No idea why, just a few words.
He's campaigning against the size of your grant. Words cost you dearly, my friend. He's determined to see the size of your land grant reduced.
I asked for his help several years ago and was refused. Now, without explanation or forewarning, he approaches me in a public place. The man is a buffoon.
Really?
I can't see how my affairs are anything to do with him.
Then you'll be none the wiser when things don't turn out the way you plan. Sir Joseph regards the Antipodes as his domain, you see. People take his views very seriously. They seek out his advice and, dare I say it, usually take it.
Yeah, man's impertinent. Good lord, the old boar was in the country 30 years ago. It was all kangaroos and savages.
Indeed. However, he says my land grant to you of 10,000 acres seems overly generous. There are many who agree with him. They say you fellows control too much already. Give the small settlers and ex-convicts a chance. That sort of thing.
But it is done.
Oh, yes. In time it will be done. For the moment, would you object to taking 5,000 acres at first, on the understanding that you'll receive the other 5,000 acres on completion of your undertaking?
If that is the way it has to be, Lord Camden, that is the way it has to be.
Back in Sydney, poor old Governor King can't believe it. He sent MacArthur to London in disgrace for a court-martial, and the road comes back with a land grant for 5,000 acres. King returns to England a bitter and disappointed man. To add insult to injury, Lord Camden even gave MacArthur some prized merino sheep from no less a source than the Royal Flocks. He claims the colony's best grazing land. Known as the cow pastures, it had been protected by previous governors for the use of cattle that might feed the colony in times of need. But MacArthur ignores protests and takes the pastures for himself. In 1806, Governor William Bligh set sail for New South Wales, a man who will turn the colony on its head and change its destiny forever. The Captain Bligh of the infamous mutiny on the Bounty. Bligh is an officer of great ability, but terrible temper, a commander who has turned loyal men into rebels. Accompanied by his daughter Mary Putland, Bligh is on a mission to sort out a troublesome colony, an appointment encouraged by no less than MacArthur's old adversary, Sir Joseph Banks. When Bligh arrives in New South Wales, the settler population is up to about 7,000 people. Only one fifth are convicts under sentence. The rest a rabble of military, free settlers and ex-convicts. Bligh sees Sydney as a physical and administrative mess. He believes that he is the very man to knock it and the Rum Corps into shape.
You're smiling, Papa.
Because, madam, a group of uppity ex-convicts and unruly officers have to learn a lesson.
Bligh sets to work immediately. He tries to end the rum economy by prohibiting the use of spirits as barter. But the real battle is about land.
Mrs. Putland.
Mr. MacArthur?
No, I'm not disturbing you, Governor. I understand there's been some talk about the land granted to me by Lord Camden. Now, I was originally offered 10,000 acres, half of which I've accepted, and with it have been doing my utmost to create wealth for this colony.
The area is called the cow pastures, for good reason, sir. A herd of wild cattle established itself there, and Governor King didn't want them driven off.
Yes, well, I had this out with the Governor before he left. My boundaries have been decided. It would not be good practice to disturb the sheep.
What have I to do with your sheep, sir? What have I to do with your cattle? Are you to have such flocks of sheep and herds of cattle as no man ever heard of before? No, sir, I know your concerns, sir. You've got 5,000 acres of land, sir, in the finest situation in the country, but by God, you shan't keep it.
But I remind you, sir, that land was granted to me by recommendation of the Privy Council by order of the Duke of Portland.
Damn the Secretary of State. He commands at home. I command here.
Well, it would not be my choice to seek redress through the law.
Damn the law! My will is the law.
And it's here that our story of the Rum Rebellion takes a turn. Now, MacArthur is the owner of a ship called the Parramatta, and it's about to get him into trouble. The colony has a law that says that any ship owner who allows a convict to escape forfeits a bond of £800. Now, this is a whopping amount of money. And a convict has escaped while the Parramatta was in Tahiti. When it sails back into Sydney, MacArthur wriggles out of trouble by renouncing his share in the vessel, leaving the captain and his crew destitute. When the captain comes to Bligh looking for help, it's clear he's come to the wrong man.
Governor, sir, my name's